The Satanic Verses. Salman Rushdie's 1988 novel detonated the largest literary backlash of the modern era. The text portrayed a prophet figure resembling Muhammad, linking sacred revelation with hallucination and satire. Religious authorities across Iran, Pakistan, India, and Egypt declared it blasphemous, leading to mass protests, arson attacks on bookstores, and multiple assassination attempts. Iran's supreme leader issued a death decree against the author, forcing him into hiding under armed protection for years. Translators and publishers were stabbed or killed in reprisal. The novel was banned in more than 20 nations, becoming evidence that fiction could trigger geopolitical violence. Its publication defined the global boundary between artistic freedom and perceived religious insult. Lolita. Vladimir Nabokov's 1955 novel became one of the most censored works in post-war literature. Written through the distorted mind of a middle-aged predator, it chronicled the manipulation and sexual abuse of a 12-year-old child. Governments in France, New Zealand, South Africa, and Canada classified it as obscene, and major publishers refused distribution under moral protection laws. Customs agencies seized shipments, and libraries removed copies, citing the risk of corrupting influence. The book's repeated censorship established the modern framework used by courts to distinguish literary art from criminal obscenity. Its fragmented narrative and linguistic precision turned The Confession of a Predator into one of the most analyzed texts in 20th century literature, the Anarchist Cookbook. Published in 1971 by William Powell, the Anarchist Cookbook became one of the most dangerous books ever printed. It compiled instructions for building explosives, hacking communication lines, and sabotaging infrastructure, all framed as a manual for rebellion against authority. Governments quickly linked it to domestic terror cases and accidental deaths caused by its unstable chemical recipes. The United States never formally banned it under free speech protection, but Australia, New Zealand, and the United Kingdom outlawed its possession under terrorism laws. Powell later renounced the book, calling it a grave mistake, but copies continued to circulate online. The text remains classified by multiple security agencies as instructional material for violent extremism and is still monitored as a digital security threat. The Da Vinci Code. Released in 2003 by Dan Brown, the Da Vinci Code blended religious history with conspiracy, claiming that the Church concealed a bloodline descending from Jesus Christ. Its mix of theology, art, and secret orders ignited international backlash. Catholic and Orthodox authorities condemned it for historical distortion, while governments in Lebanon, Egypt, and India banned or censored it for blasphemy. The Vatican urged boycotts, and religious leaders accused the author of deliberate misinformation. Despite the criticism, the novel sold over 80 million copies and became one of the fastest-selling books in history. The controversy transformed it into a global case study on how commercial fiction can challenge institutional authority under the guise of entertainment. Naked Lunch. William S. Burroughs' 1959 novel shattered literary boundaries with its fragmented structure, explicit drug use, and graphic sexual violence. It depicted addiction, medical experimentation, and state surveillance through surreal, non-linear scenes that defied traditional narrative. The book was banned in Boston, Los Angeles, and several foreign countries under obscenity laws, leading to one of the last major literary trials in the United States. Judges ultimately ruled in its favor, expanding First Amendment protection to include experimental fiction. The case reshaped how courts defined artistic expression versus obscenity. Naked Lunch became a turning point in American literature, proving that censorship often accelerates the cultural influence of the very work it targets. Brave New World. Aldous Huxley's 1932 novel depicted a future where human embryos were engineered, emotions chemically controlled, and individuality replaced by mass conformity. Governments and institutions saw its themes of sexual freedom, state control, and drug-induced happiness as moral threats. Ireland banned it immediately after publication, and Australia followed with restrictions that lasted for years. Schools in the United States, India, and Canada repeatedly challenged its presence for language and explicit content. Despite suppression, its predictions about genetic manipulation and behavioral engineering became disturbingly accurate. Brave New World remains a foundational text in debates over bioethics, state control, and the price of engineered stability. The 120 Days of Sodom, written by Marquis de Sade in 1785 while imprisoned in the Bastille. The 120 Days of Sodom documents 4 libertines committing systematic acts of torture, murder, and sexual violence inside a remote castle. The manuscript was hidden for over a century and condemned as the most obscene work in French literature. France, the United States, and the United Kingdom banned it under obscenity laws well into the 20th century, and publishers faced prosecution for printing excerpts. Psychiatrists later used the text to define the clinical term sadism, directly naming it after the author. The book's survival from a prison scroll to modern circulation marks it as both a historical artifact and a continuing study in the psychology of cruelty. Animal Farm. George Orwell's 1945 allegory used farm animals to portray the rise of Soviet totalitarianism and the betrayal of revolutionary ideals. The book was banned across the Soviet Union and its satellite states for anti-communist content, and publishers in allied nations suppressed it to maintain political favor. Copies were confiscated in Cuba, Kenya, and the United Arab Emirates under similar restrictions. Propaganda departments labeled it Western subversion and prohibited translation without state approval. Despite censorship, smuggled editions circulated through Eastern Europe, making it one of the most distributed underground texts of the Cold War. Animal Farm remains a primary reference in the study of political manipulation and the corruption of ideology through power. 1984. George Orwell's 1949 novel portrayed a total surveillance state where language, memory, and truth were controlled by political authority. The book was banned in the Soviet Union and several communist nations for its portrayal of dictatorship, and later restricted in some Western schools for its violence and sexual content. Authorities in Vietnam and Myanmar removed it from circulation, classifying it as subversive material. Despite suppression, its terminology such as Big Brother, thought police, and doublethink entered global political vocabulary. 1984 remains the definitive manual for understanding state censorship, information control, and the psychological mechanisms that sustain authoritarian power. Operation Dark Heart. Published in 2010 by former U.S. Army intelligence officer Anthony Shaffer, Operation Dark Heart exposed classified surveillance methods and intelligence operations in Afghanistan. After initial approval, the Pentagon reversed its decision and purchased nearly 10,000 printed copies to destroy them before public release. Officials cited national security risks, claiming the book revealed sensitive sources and tactics. A heavily redacted version was later published, with over 400 passages blacked out or rewritten. The case became one of the few recorded instances of a government physically buying and burning its own publication. Operation Dark Heart remains a modern symbol of how state secrecy can override transparency, even in democratic systems. Watch How Every Major Dictator Died, explained to know how power turns against its own creators. Like and subscribe for more untold history they tried to erase.